Well, thank you again for joining us this afternoon for our second session on board governance. And again, we're just delighted to be here with Pat McMillan. Thank you again for inviting us back to meet again to talk about the next topic around board members. And today we will be talking about the orientation process and the assimilation of board members. And then we all should be talking about, hopefully, about the performance of board members and how to really increase their attributes. But again, just for context, a few weeks ago we met and we talked about kind of the board attributes and the history of boards. And then we spent a lot more time then talking beyond the attributes about the recruiting process and the selection process. So now that we've recruited and we've selected, Pat, let's go ahead and talk about really this orientation process. Certainly, we were just talking before we went live about some of the research you've done. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, it's kind of interesting. It's actually not our research. We did the research on the research, and we got entirely too much out of the effort. We do note that about a number of years ago, not very many years ago, 500 NPOs were surveyed. And the feedback was very, very interesting. The survey specifically was about board orientation. And 53% of the respondents, these are board members, said that their organization had formal board member orientation. But 50% of those said it wasn't very good.
Wow. So if I'm doing the math right, and I could be wrong, I'm numerically dyslexic.
Oh boy.
That means only about 25% of the 500 organizations, so we're talking 100, 125, had an effective orientation. Half of them were orienting, and of the ones that were orienting, only half of them were effective. Did I hear you correctly?
You did.
Wow.
An old mentor of mine, Howie Hendricks, would say, what we have here is activity without accomplishment and motion without meaning. A lot of energy, but not a lot of execution. 30% indicated that they were not briefed on this current issues confronting the organization. These are brand new board members coming in. What are the challenges? What are the strategic issues and challenges that are confronting the organization? 31% said that they were not told about the strategic plan. 35% didn't get to meet with senior leaders. And 65% did not hear about how the CEO or the executive director was evaluated. Now, those are just a few of the bullet points. What it told us was there's a lot of energy being put into orientation, but not a lot of effectiveness coming out of it.
Pat, I'm sorry, my ADD just kicked in. And so you said that 65% of the new board members in their orientation process were not briefed or informed of the CEO's performance evaluation process.
Correct.
Is that an indication of maybe potentially how many board members how many CEOs are not being evaluated? Or is there any correlation to that and where my mind went?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
They could be evaluated and maybe even well evaluated.
Okay.
We don't know. All we know is these brand new board members, 65% of them aren't aware of the process.
Okay. So again, you can see how quickly somebody can jump to a conclusion that's not inferred by the research. So thank you for clarifying that. Yeah.
Let me amplify one thing too, Stan, as we talk about it. The sole employee of a board of directors is a CEO. He or she is the linking pin to the rest of the organization. I don't understand everything I know, but I know that the single most important variable for organizational success is leadership. That's why one reason why boards are so important. They choose the leader of the organization, the managerial leader. It would seem that setting goals and evaluating that leader against those goals would be foundational to the board's job responsibilities, and it is, by the way.
Right.
And so that's actually a bigger number than it would seem. The 65% should be in all caps and bold.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's some interesting insights, and certainly it's great fodder as a board member or if you're in management to think about how do we assist the board in developing an appropriate orientation. And again, it's the board's responsibility, but again, board members are volunteers and they only have authority when they're in session. And so, maybe a combination where board members may need to delegate some of these activities to management to assist in putting together appropriate orientation packets where management, the CEO and maybe the CEO's cabinet, the C-suite, are involved in both preparing the documentation as well as presenting it as an assistance to the board, because again, limited time and availability, it has to come from the board. But I'm trying to find that balance of, I've worked with enough boards that the effectiveness of the board many times is augmented by having a dedicated resource or an allocated resource to assist them in this development of appropriate and effective orientation, content, curriculum, and timing.
Well, I agree. I think that we'll come back to this later about what it is that's in that orientation.
Yeah.
And what's in it will determine who should present it.
Yeah.
And picture a list of items that we want every new board member to understand. And time permitting, we'll come back to that list. Some of those have got to be presented by the chairman.
Absolutely.
So others by board chairman. Others by the executive director. Others possibly by the CFO or the chief operating officer or the head of field programs.
Yeah.
So it's really a team presentation.
Right.
Now we can picture a sheet of paper, a table. Here's the item, and here's who's presenting it. The chairman and the executive director on that one. Just the executive director on this one, and so on and so forth.
Correct.
But to your point, everybody's involved, and it gives this new board member a bunch of connections to the organization very quickly.
As well as for management to have a connection to the new board member.
That's correct.
And then obviously at some point, maybe not in this session, but I'll tease out the third one. These critical relationships and understanding the boundaries on both sides
Yeah.
of the appropriate communication between the board and management, and it's especially that linkage through
That's
the
right.
CEO.
That's correct.
So let's unpack a little bit more about the orientation, the process, and kind of the timeline, and then we'll get into some of the content.
Okay. Well, let's talk, first of all, about the context. Remember, we talked in a previous session, we talked about the fact that boards are complex, subtle, ambiguous. They don't meet very often. The average board meets about 7 times a year. That's the average. Some more, some less. And the meetings aren't very long. Let's say 3 to 6 hours. Now, some boards meet a couple of days each meeting, but not all. So they are making the organization's most important decisions in a relatively limited period of time. These meetings are crammed full. They're basically the only orientation that takes place in a meeting is they're watching the meeting. Does that make sense?
Yep, been there, done that.
So if we want, or if our theory is we want to, the orientation of board members is learning on the job, by the time they've learned the job is over. They're gone. I'm reminded of a metaphor of some airplanes. A 747 takes 3,000 meters, 10,000 feet to take off. An F-35 on an aircraft carrier takes off in about 85 to 90 meters. That's 287 feet. Again, 10,000 feet, 287 feet. How fast do you want your board members to get in the air and be positive contributors, to apply the skills and the attributes that we discussed in our last session at the boardroom table and the deliberations and decisions? The F-35 is the equivalent of a formal orientation process.
And Pat, just go a little bit deeper in that from a practical perspective, having experienced this with a variety of boards. What you're saying is absolutely important and necessary. What I do find is some of the most impactful and effective orientations actually many times will happen outside of the actual board meeting, maybe a day before or a time period before, so that the focus is on the orientation of the new board member or members. And those who don't actually do a formal orientation, I have seen the impact in the boardroom two ways. Where a new board member, because of their personality, will be very outspoken, but out of context.
Yes.
And it's frustrating that you have all these opinions, but you don't understand what we're trying to get done. You've not been oriented. Others withhold their valuable input because of their temperament. I don't have context. I'm not going to speak yet.
Yes, that's right.
And those are the two outcomes of not having a proper orientation that's complete and as they're getting started early.
Right. Exactly right. It's equivalent to the hockey team proactively putting its players in the penalty box. And they're on the ice without a full team.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. I've got no more comments about that because you nailed it.
Okay, so we agree. We really need an effective orientation process and timing for this.
Mm-hmm.
What all needs to be included in that orientation?
Well, let's think it through. What do they need to know? One thing that comes to mind, and by the way, the list is different depending on the organization and the relationship the individual has to the organization. For example, an elder going on the elder board in a church has probably been a member for some time, has a really good understanding of what's gone on.
Right.
So the first item on my list would be the history of the organization. And maybe not so important for that elder, but very important for a faith-based NPO.
Yeah.
When was it founded? Why was it founded? Who was the founder? What were some of the milestones in its first years, if that's appropriate, but history. The current state of things. What's going on now? What are our challenges, opportunities, and threats that are confronting the ministry? Strategic plan. What is it? How are we doing? Are we making progress? What are the headwinds and tailwinds that are hindering or helping that progress? Organization chart, but not just the chart. The people on the chart. There's our executive director. Let me tell you about him. You're going to spend a lot of time with him, but let me tell you what he looks like from the board seat. And there's our CFO, and so on and so forth. There's Mary Jane. She's a receptionist, but let me tell you about her, et cetera, and her experience in such and such. How would you describe the culture of the organization? Board dynamics. What's the culture in the boardroom? All right, well, we keep things short and to the point. We don't feel the need to say something if it's already been said. You get a grade for class participation, but for not class duplication. If you've got something to say, let it move
Or class domination.
or class domination, or class abdication.
Right.
And but what's the dynamic? Let me tell you about the role of the chairman. Here's our committee structure, et cetera. Here are the minutes for the last year. What are some things that come to your mind? It seems like I want something to do about finances. What would I tell a board member about the financial state of the ministry?
Right. Yeah. Now, everything you've shared is exactly spot on. I'm going to take it down to maybe some of the practical ways that I've seen this done well. Is certainly you want to have a list.
Yeah.
And you want to keep it current. And again, this is where maybe having an administrative support
From
pull
the
this together from
management.
from management's office, CEO's office, executive director. But what I find is, again, recognizing board members are volunteers and have busy lives, giving them an orientation packet maybe a week or two in advance so they can be doing some of this review asynchronously on their own. And some organizations that maybe are a little bit more mature, have a longer history, where you may have already produced a history video that may already be on your website.
Correct.
Now you're not having to spend an extra hour every time with a new board member giving history. It's already been recorded. Watch this. Certainly minutes, you can provide them with, here are the minutes from the last year. What I find is, again, and I'm a little bit old school still, so, I'll try to modernize it, but I remember being a part of some boards where there was a 3-ring notebook that
Yes.
had things in it for me, along with maybe a spiral bound of institutional knowledge, including the board manual, the things you talked about, the culture, the expectations, or structure that doesn't change much,
Yes.
the bylaws, so that, and you always bring this notebook, the spiral bound one that's permanently put together, if you will. The notebook, certainly, the 3-ring you would use maybe at the board meeting. But what I love now is I've actually been with some boards where you're issued an iPad.
Yes.
And it's all your documentation's there. It's downloaded in advance to you, so you can read it digitally. You're bringing your iPad to the board meeting, and all the communications there with the appropriate usernames, passwords for your role as a board member. So you don't have to go out and find it and try to figure out where to get it, and it's just all preloaded, ready to go. You come to your board meeting and it's there. You're not trying to figure out how to log into something because my laptop is a different platform. Highly sophisticated. Not every organization is going to go there, but you can see kind of the bell curve of a more simple approach to a high-tech solution. But the idea is, depending on the organization, most organizations will gravitate to one or the other. Again, we talked last time about young organizations that have been recently birthed with the founder, and it's family, friends-driven board. At that point, it's going to be a lot more informal.
They were there.
They were there. They helped start it, and you're fleshing it out as you go. It's more of a working board, developing the culture we want. But yeah, I would certainly, I remember being my experience of the first time I actually experienced board orientation, how grateful I was to get content in advance and to know I had to be there a half a day early and spend a half a day with the key leaders, including the board chair, the CEO, and then they would bring in some of the other management for a 30-minute meeting to meet and get to know them relationally. But then they
Yes.
would share the financial statements, or here's our auditor, or whatever the pieces were, so that by the time I walked into the board meeting the next day, I had been booted up. I knew who everybody was. I knew in advance, the issues going on.
Stan, you're dead on. And I love the iPad idea, by the way. Most of the corporate boards that I sat on had that effect. There was a number of services, some of them very cost effectively, where they're all protected
Right.
and highly secure.
Yep.
And
And they belong to the organization, so they maintain that.
The
Exactly.
iPads were the organizations, and when you left the board, the iPad went back.
Exactly.
I'm seeing more and more ministries do this.
Yeah.
So OM here in the United States provides both their U.S. board members and their international board members with an iPad. But outside of the iPad, that 3-ring binder that you mentioned is key. Many boards call that the board handbook.
Yep.
One of the things that we've found helpful with that board handbook is keep the stuff that you use in front and then have appendices for the back. But you would have the mission statement, that would be in the front,
Yeah.
because the mission statement ought to infect our decisions and deliberations about programs and other decisions. Bylaws goes in the back,
Right.
et cetera.
Yep.
The processes would be in there. How we evaluate the CEO,
Yeah.
how we orient it, how we bring on new board members, who's the committees, the membership, the chairman, the bios of the board members, et cetera. So, yeah, outstanding idea. I failed to mention that, and you caught it. But I think without a board handbook, we're asking our board members to be forensic,
Right.
forensic auditors,
Right.
finding the information about the organization, and often they need it at their fingertips.
And the other thing I find is a lot of ministries will actually send their board packet a week in advance, and I absolutely love that. But what happens is you get into the board meeting and you're having this discussion, and suddenly you got a reference to, well, can we do that? It's in the bylaws. Well, anybody have a copy of the bylaws?
Exactly right.
Suddenly everything comes to a grinding halt because nobody has it. Well, we have to table it, and we'll come back to that.
Board
instead of-
handbook.
It's in that board handbook.
Yeah,
And-
absolutely.
Now, the other interesting thing, and we'll probably go into this some more in the next session, when we talk about board governance and board polity and, Robert's Rules of Orders, and some organizations are very, very formal around, adhering to the process.
Yes.
Others are so informal that you may not even get minutes at the end of the day, and nobody's, checked to see if there's a quorum even. But I think that's really important part, as you mentioned, even within the orientation process. And so then as part of that, I hadn't even thought about this, but there might even be a checklist that new board member is going through that says, yes, I've reviewed this, I understand this. And if they don't, maybe a check that says, I'm unfamiliar with something that we would either assume they have or we're providing in that handbook, one way or the other, but I would like more information about.
That reminds me of something that I saw in a note that you sent me, dealing with the fact that often it's helpful if they have a mentor or a board coach that walks with them for maybe the first 6 months or first year. And where he or she is asking the member, did you understand that? You have any questions? Can I explain anything?
Yeah, I love that, especially in the context, like you're saying, that first 6 months where I don't want to make it too formal and too rigid, but if you think about that mentor placing a phone call or, hey, before the board meeting, you want to go get breakfast, let me tee up what we will plan for today.
Right.
So that they're up to speed. And then afterwards, over dinner, over dessert, can I call you, whatever it is? Let's debrief. What did you learn? What did you experience? Because that orientation process is actually a little bit of a 360. Because that new board member, the way I view things is I want their feedback.
Yes.
How well did the orientation go? What are the gaps that we need to provide for the next person?
Right.
What was effective? And it may be the message was right, but the technique needed improvement, or somebody else needed to deliver the content.
Right. Excellent. I'll tell you one quick story. I get accused of telling too many stories. That's what happens when you get a little bit older. But it's about board orientation. I sat on the board for many years of a very large global insurance company. And I remember during a period of time where we had the whole board sit in on the audit meetings. I didn't understand very much about what was going on in the audit meeting because with this particular type of insurance and the company, everything was in acronyms. And I was too shy or embarrassed to tell them that I didn't understand the acronyms. What I didn't understand is that 11 of the other 9 board members didn't understand the acronyms either. We brought in a brand new board member who was so qualified, we made him the chair of the audit committee because we had lost ours. In the very first meeting, I remember sitting there. We weren't 3 minutes into the regular part of the meeting, and he looks up and he says, would someone tell me what XYZ means? And it brought down the house. For that particular company, a list of acronyms was added to the board handbook.
Yep.
And not just for the audit committee. So each organization has some unique things that they need to put in.
Exactly.
And sometimes tongue-in-cheek, but acronyms prove to be pretty important in this particular instance.
Absolutely. I'm gonna throw you a curveball, Pat. This is something we've not talked about, but I want to squeeze this in between the orientation of bringing in new board members and the next topic that we have talking about today is evaluating board members. in between there, like my ADD just kicked in. I really want your wisdom here. Talk to me about, and maybe it plays into the culture of it is the culture of the board, and it plays into the orientation. Somehow I have had I'm going to just call them personally, some negative experiences, not necessarily being on boards, but observing boards and their cultures, that within a not-for-profit setting, and certainly within a ministry setting, I tend to see this more often than I wish I did, where there's a sense of frugality towards board members. So board members are already donating their time. Many of them are paying their own expenses. But there's not this thoughtfulness to take care of the board members when they're having meetings. Again, everything from making sure they have quality materials, again, whether it's an iPad or not, but thinking about their needs, again, maybe having snacks in the room, something to drink, allocating the right amount of time for relationship building. So it's not just 3 hours of we jump in immediately, we go deep, we go hard, and then we dismiss, everybody leaves, and there's no relationship building. And certainly I've worked with enough ministry boards where for some board members, it is a struggle to pay all their own expenses to come and be a part of the board. And so at some point, you lose really quality board members because maybe they're entering into retirement age and don't have the same resources, or they don't have a company to pay for them to be at the board. And I'm not necessarily talking about compensation. I'm just talking about, again, where I'm really heading with this is investing in developing your board members, where it's not just, hey, we want your wisdom and we're not going to give anything back. But again, the orientation is an opportunity to invest back in educating, coaching, training board members so that not only will they be a better board member here, but they'll be a better board member in other ministry settings to impact the kingdom. Sometimes it's as simple as being gracious and maybe sending a fruit basket back at home because the spouse gave up their mate to attend a board meeting. But there's always this, we need you to give to us. We want your time. We want everything. But there's nothing reciprocating back that says, hey, here's a logo shirt from our ministry to wear as a board member.
Yeah.
Here's something for your spouse. Here's some little token gift. It has nothing to do with compensation. But it's just, we want to appreciate you. Here's a new resource that just came out we want you to have.
Yes.
Talk to me about that as part of the orientation process and the culture, because that culture piece does affect the orientation and the quality of the board members and the outcomes that the board will deliver to the ministry.
Yeah. Boy, that's a pile of really good stuff that you just put on the table. We might think about orientation as having several categories.
Yeah.
And to your latter point, let's start there. Number one is make them feel welcome.
Yeah.
Make them feel welcome. Thank you for coming on our board. The collective IQ just got brighter. I remember when Delta bought Western Airlines. Most people have never heard of Western Airlines, but it was Eastern Airlines and Western Airlines. And their motto was, the best just got better. Welcome aboard, Western. And to your point, sending some flowers or candy, or if you've just recruited a female board member and you know that her husband is a golfer, a set of 12 Titleist balls, and say, welcome, we're looking forward to seeing you at the next board meeting or a board meeting. So make them feel welcome.
Yeah.
And that's not just a quick email. That's a period of time.
Yep.
Going back to the frugality issue, one of the challenges we've got is to create an environment that enhances, facilitates, cultivates, nurtures a really bright collective IQ. Picture each board member as a brain cell in the greater things. We want each of them operating at maximum efficiency. Many of the ministry boards that I've consulted with, and several that I've sat on, had a policy where we would buy the plane ticket for a board member if need be. And who we did that for was kept very confidential. Some of us could afford our own tickets. We had a business that could do it, or we had the money to do it. Others needed help. We didn't want them to have to ask for help. We anticipated that we needed to ask them if they needed help. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Because we're bright enough to add up what the salary of a pastor would be, or what school teacher.
Right.
We want those board meetings to be comfortable and edifying and warm and friendly and safe.
Yep.
Nothing safer than a good snack bar in the corner and hot coffee.
Yeah.
And that's hospitality.
Yeah.
That's a welcoming. It's stimulating the collective IQ and our ability to deliberate and be collegial and engage. And those coffee breaks are great times where things are talked about. How are you doing? And how am I doing? And so on and so forth. So I affirm what you said.
Yeah.
We've got to be like gardeners, cultivating, nurturing the garden, to keep it flourishing and at its very best. So welcome is number one, and ensuring that boardroom facilitates the collective IQ, number two. Adding on a day once a year or 2 days once a year for a board thinking retreat where we fly in and invite the spouses, if we can afford it, or we raise the money for it.
Yeah, a lot of times there'll be somebody, a major donor or somebody on the board who
They
says,
get it.
I can afford to pay for this for everybody.
They get it. Not everybody appreciates it, but some do.
Yeah. And a lot of times, I mean, I've been on boards where they, everybody was, we'll offer to pay for everybody's ticket. And most of us said, thank you, but I can cover my ticket.
Yeah, I can cover it.
But just the gesture, let me know that they valued me and my time.
Yes.
And I think that's important. I want to manage our time and get to the next really important piece here as well, Pat, in the remaining 10, 15 minutes that we have. We did talk a little bit about the evaluation process of board members. So we've started with, the recruiting, selecting. We've talked about, now we've got them on board, we've got them oriented, and we got them productive. So we did the F-35 routine, get them in quick, get them oriented and productive. So how do we maintain that productivity or effectiveness? So we're getting the outcomes desired by the board members. And you and I both know, life happens, and some board members lose interest for a variety of reasons. Others have a health challenge or a personal challenge that takes place. And so at some point, board members fade off the scene. Others are just distracted. Some are fully engaged. That's just life, but there's got to be a way to manage this effectively. What are some of your experiences and what are some of your recommendations to do this?
Well, first of all, do it. That's number one.
Just do it.
Just do it. That's the old Nike motto, if I remember right. There is this great hesitancy to evaluate board members. We're afraid we'll unsettle them, we'll make them mad, they'll leave, they'll yell and scream and throw things. I don't know what it is, but somehow our courage fades away with the fever heat of summer when we think about having to evaluate a board member, particularly if there's some coaching that needs to be done about their engagement at the board, their tendency to talk too much, their attendance, whatever. There's several types of evaluation. One is just an interview where the chairman and maybe the chairman of the governance committee or some other seasoned board member, but two at least, generally not more. You don't want this to be a inquisition. This is an interview, two sides to the table.
Right.
How are you doing? How are things going? Are we meeting your expectations as a board member? Even if they've been on the board for 5 years. How can we help you better in your governance responsibilities and skills as a board member? How can the board improve our processes overall? Listen, two sides to the table. Here's some feedback we've got for you. We could benefit by hearing from you more often. We know you've got a lot going in that head. I can see it in your facial expression. We'd like to hear it come out.
Yeah.
That's one, the interview. Or we could benefit from not hearing you so much. Bob, one of the dilemmas is you're so assertive. We like that. That's leadership in some respects, but it's causing some of our less assertive people to shut down, etc. Another one would be a self-evaluation where they answer 10 to 20 questions about how they're doing. Am I praying for the executive director and the leadership team? Am I contributing as I'm able to, etc.? I think that the third one that a lot of people are using in today's world is a 360, an anonymous confidential survey where the board members evaluate the other board members. The chairman evaluates them, and maybe even the executive director gets a crack at it. Depends on the relationship. Those are three possible evaluation tools. Interview would be the lightest touch. The self-evaluation followed down with some coffee with the chairman would be another one, or maybe that leads to the interview with the chairman and someone else. The 360 is a little bit more robust and sometimes puts people a little bit on edge. I do that only with a very mature board. And one last point on a 360. All 360s need to be done for developmental reasons, not for evaluative reasons.
Yeah.
And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. So what you've just shared has exactly been my experience. Unfortunately, there aren't enough boards doing evaluations
At
of their
all.
own effect.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of the 360, and I've worked with some boards who do that. Not the traditional 360 we think of from a development,
Correct.
process, but it's more of a simple kind of a one-page PDF that everybody fills out on themselves, and they fill out on each other.
Yes.
And then you aggregate it, so it is confidential. It's not necessarily anonymous, but it is confidential. And then it's followed up by the chair of the board and or a chair of a committee that they serve on. And that gives great feedback. Like you're saying, it's not necessarily punitive unless it needs to be.
That's a different topic.
That is a different topic. Yeah. But the idea is, here's where you're really adding value. Mm-hmm. Here's where we want more value. And here's where we need less value.
Yeah.
And those are the boards that I've seen be incredibly effective when they've developed that trust. But they've been selected properly. They've been oriented so they understand in advance what my role is, what the expectations are at the board level, and for me personally. And then now I'm being evaluated, and I get a chance to speak to how well am I doing. I think I am. But I also get to hear from my peers, and then I get to hear from the leaders of the groups that I'm in at the board or other subcommittees otherwise. I think that's just an incredible way to strengthen the board. And quite frankly, from that process, and we'll talk about this next time, it actually leads to further board development. That, again, too many boards don't invest in helping their board members become better. And so now you bring in guest speakers to now start adding value around leadership and governance and other areas that maybe even some of the committees might get some additional training on, so that each board member is now being further developed in whatever areas that they have self-identified collectively and individually. And so again, Pat, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for inviting me to your office to have this conversation. And I can't wait to see you again in a few weeks when we talk about the next topic around just the board management and managing critical relationships. That's going to be a fun topic.